The red dust of Kepler 442b swirled in the alien wind as smoke rose from the burning wreckage scattered across the battlefield. General Vextar stood tall on a rocky outcrop, his dark green scales catching the light of the planet's twin suns. His yellow eyes swept across the destruction below with satisfaction. Another victory for the mighty Zephyrian Empire. The reptilian general was an imposing figure, standing nearly 8 feet tall with powerful claws and razor-sharp teeth that gleamed when he smiled. Thick armor covered his muscular frame, decorated, with medals from dozens of conquered worlds. Behind him, his officers waited in respectful silence, knowing better than to interrupt their commander's moment of triumph. "Commander Kresh," Vextar called to his second-in-command without turning around. "Report on the prisoners." The smaller Zephyrian stepped forward, his own scales a lighter shade of green. 17 Coalition soldiers captured alive, General. The rest were eliminated during the assault. We found them hiding in the old mining complex just as our scouts reported. Vextar nodded slowly. The Coalition forces had been trying to establish a foothold on this planet for months, but every attempt ended the same way. The Zephyrian Empire's superior technology and tactics made quick work of any enemy force foolish enough to challenge them. "Bring them up," the general ordered. "I want to see what pathetic creatures the Coalition is sending against us now." Minutes later, a group of captured soldiers was marched up the rocky slope under heavy guard. Vextar examined them with the cold interest of a scientist studying insects. Most were familiar species he had encountered before. 3 Kandorians with their blue-tinted skin and impressive height stood defiant despite their bonds. 2 Voltarians, small and gray with large black eyes, trembled as they walked. A single Arctanian female, her white fur matted with dirt and blood, glared at her captors with fierce orange eyes. But one prisoner caught the general's attention immediately, and not in a good way. "What is that supposed to be?" Vextar asked, pointing one clawed finger at the smallest figure in the group. The creature in question was clearly not built for war. It stood barely 6 feet tall, with pale pink skin and thin brown hair that stuck to its head with sweat. Its body looked soft and weak compared to the other species present. Even wounded and exhausted, the other prisoners maintained an air of dignity and strength. This one just looked tired. "According to our records, it's called a human, General," Commander Kresh replied, consulting a data tablet. "They're a relatively new species in the Coalition. Came from a planet called Earth, in the Outer Rim territories." Vextar let out a harsh laugh that sounded like grinding stone. "A human? This is what passes for a soldier in the Coalition now?" He walked closer to get a better look at the strange creature. The human wore the same basic Coalition uniform as the others, but it hung loose on his small frame. His weapon had been taken away, of course, but Vextar doubted it would have made much difference. The creature's arms looked thin and weak. Its skin appeared soft and easily damaged. Most amusing of all, it had no natural weapons. No claws, no fangs, no protective scales or thick hide. Just pink flesh that would tear at the slightest touch. "You," Vextar said, addressing the human directly. "What is your name and rank?" The human lifted his head slowly. His eyes were a strange blue color that Vextar had never seen before. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "Private Jake Collins, sir, Ohio National Guard 1st Battalion." The Zephyrian general burst into laughter again, and his officers joined in. "National Guard? Not even their regular military?" Vextar shook his head in disbelief. "The Coalition must be more desperate than we thought if they're sending weekend warriors to fight a real war." Jake said nothing, but his blue eyes never left the general's face. There was something in that steady gaze that Vextar found slightly irritating, though he couldn't say why. "Look at this specimen," the general continued, addressing his troops now. "No natural armor, no weapons, no size or strength to speak of. How did such a weak species even survive long enough to develop space travel?" Some of the Zephyrian soldiers chuckled at their commander's words. They had all heard stories about human colonies falling easily to their forces. Apparently the stories were true if this was the best the humans could offer. "I wonder," Vextar mused, circling around Jake, like a predator studying its prey. What possible use the Coalition thought you could be in a military operation? Can you even carry a proper weapon with those thin arms? Do you have any combat training at all, or did they just hand you a uniform and point you toward the enemy? Jake remained silent, but Vextar noticed the other prisoners watching the exchange, with worried expressions. The Kandorian warriors in particular seemed tense, as if they expected something to happen. But what could they possibly be concerned about? Their human companion was clearly the weakest member of their group. Perhaps, the general said with a cruel smile, we should conduct a small experiment, a demonstration for my troops of just how far the mighty Coalition has fallen. He turned to address his soldiers. Set up a combat circle. I think our human friend here would benefit from a lesson in Zephyrian superiority. Commander Kresh stepped forward. General, is that wise? The creature is already wounded. It might not survive a proper combat trial. Exactly the point, Vextar replied. When word spreads that we defeated their soldiers so easily that we use them for entertainment, it will crush Coalition morale across this entire sector. The Zephyrian troops began clearing a circular area in the dirt while their prisoners watched. Jake seemed calm, despite the obvious threat to his life. He sat down on a nearby rock, apparently using the time to rest. His breathing was steady and he showed no signs of the fear that Vextar expected to see. Nervous, human? The general asked, crouching down to bring his face level with Jake's. You should be. In a few minutes you're going to learn why the Zephyrian Empire has conquered half the galaxy, while your species still plays with primitive technology. Jake met the alien's yellow eyes without flinching. I appreciate the warning, sir. It's always good to know what you're up against. Something about the human's tone made Vextar pause. There was no sarcasm in the words, no defiance or fear. Just a simple acknowledgement, as if Jake was filing away useful information for later use. It was the kind of response a professional soldier might give, but that was impossible. This creature was clearly no warrior. You're either very brave or very stupid, Vextar said finally. I suppose we'll find out which in a few minutes. As the combat circle took shape, the general noticed Jake stretching his arms and shoulders, with slow, careful movements. The human winced slightly when he moved his left side, confirming that he had been injured in the earlier battle. Good. That would make the demonstration even more impressive. The other prisoners were forced to sit, in a line where they could watch the proceedings. The Kandorian warriors exchanged glances that Vextar couldn't interpret. The Voltarians covered their large eyes, apparently unable to watch what was about to happen. Only the Arctanian female continued to glare at her captors with undimmed hatred. Sergeant Gex, Vextar called out. You'll have the honor of representing Zephyrian strength in this demonstration. A battle-scarred soldier stepped forward, even larger than the general himself. Gex was a veteran of dozens of campaigns, his scales marked with old wounds that had healed into pale scars. His claws had been sharpened to razor points and his fangs jutted from his massive jaw like curved daggers. Jake stood up slowly, rolling his shoulders one more time. He looked even smaller next to the massive Zephyrian warrior who would be his opponent. The size difference was almost comical. Any last words, human? Vexatar asked with amusement. Jake considered the question seriously. Just one thing, General. You might want to pay close attention to what happens next. You could learn something important about humans. The Zephyrian general laughed so hard that tears formed in his yellow eyes. Learn something from this pathetic creature? The only thing he would learn was how quickly human bones could break. The combat circle was ready within minutes. Zephyrian soldiers formed a tight ring around the cleared area, their weapons lowered but ready. General Vextar positioned himself where he could see everything clearly. His officers gathered around, him like eager students waiting for a lesson. Jake stepped into the circle calmly, his movements slow and careful. He favored his left side where the injury bothered him, and Vextar noted this weakness with satisfaction. The human looked around at the watching faces with what appeared to be mild curiosity, as if he was more interested in studying his audience than preparing for combat. Before we begin this demonstration, General Vextar announced loudly, let me educate you all about the species you're about to see destroyed. He gestured toward Jake with a theatrical wave of his clawed hand. Humans are perhaps the most overrated species in the galaxy. They emerged from their little planet only 50 years ago, yet somehow convinced the coalition to accept them as members. The Zephyrian troops chuckled appreciatively. Several of them had fought against human colonies in recent campaigns, and their experiences supported their general's words. Human settlements fell quickly when faced with superior Zephyrian forces. Their technology is primitive, Vexitar continued, warming to his subject. Their ships are slow and poorly armed. Their weapons are basic projectile throwers that can barely penetrate modern armor. They have no natural defenses, no evolutionary advantages, no special abilities of any kind. They are, in every measurable way, inferior to nearly every other species in known space. Jake listened to this speech without any visible reaction. He stood quietly in the center of the circle, occasionally shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His breathing remained steady and controlled, despite the obvious threat he faced. Commander Kresh stepped forward with a data tablet. General, our intelligence reports confirm your assessment. Human colonies have offered minimal resistance in every encounter. Their military equipment appears to be several generations behind current standards. Most surprisingly, they seem to have no concept of proper military tactics or strategy. Exactly, Vexitar said with a pleased hiss. They fight like children playing war games. No coordination, no advanced planning, no understanding of how real combat works. It's almost embarrassing how easily they surrender when faced with genuine opposition. Sergeant Gex cracked his knuckles, producing sounds like breaking bones. The massive Zephyrian warrior was clearly eager to begin the demonstration, his yellow eyes fixed on Jake with the focused intensity of a predator sizing up. Easy prey. Tell me, human, Vexitar called out. What training did your National Guard provide? Did they teach you how to march in formation, how to salute properly, or did they skip directly to the surrender procedures? This comment drew loud laughter from the watching soldiers. Even some of the prisoner guards joined in, though they tried to maintain their professional demeanor. Jake finally spoke, his voice carrying clearly across the circle. We learned the basics, sir. How to handle weapons, field medicine, survival, techniques. Standard military preparation. Standard military preparation, Vexitar repeated mockingly. I'm sure it was very thorough. Did they teach you hand-to-hand combat? Because I'm curious to see what human fighting techniques look like. We covered some combat training, yes, sir. The general's laugh was harsh and grating. Combat training. I see. Well, you're about to receive an advanced education in what real combat looks like. Sergeant Gex has fought in 47 major battles across 12 different worlds. He has personally killed over 300 enemy soldiers in close combat. I suspect your training did not prepare you for anything quite like him. Jake nodded, politely. I'm sure you're right, sir. He looks like an experienced fighter. The simple acknowledgement somehow made Vexitar even more amused. The human showed no bravado, no false courage, no attempt to appear more dangerous than he obviously was. It was almost refreshing to encounter an enemy who understood his own limitations so clearly. Before we begin, the general announced, let me share some interesting facts about human military history. According to our research, they have never won a significant battle against any advanced alien species. Their most famous military victories were achieved against other humans using primitive weapons. They have no experience with modern warfare, no understanding of galactic combat doctrine, and no notable strategic achievements of any kind. The watching Zephyrians murmured appreciatively at this information. It confirmed what they had observed during their own encounters with human forces. Furthermore, Vexitar continued, humans appear to have evolved on an unusually peaceful world. They lack most of the survival instincts that other species developed through natural selection. They have no natural weapons, no protective adaptations, and remarkably poor physical capabilities compared to true warrior races like ourselves. Jake stretched his arms above his head, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his injury. The gesture looked casual, but Vexitar noticed that the human's muscles moved smoothly despite his apparent exhaustion. Still, flexibility meant nothing against raw strength and combat experience. I want you all to observe carefully, the general told his troops. Notice how the human moves, how he reacts to pressure, how quickly he tires under stress. This will be valuable intelligence for future encounters with coalition forces that include human personnel. The circle of soldiers tightened slightly, everyone eager for the best possible view of the coming demonstration. Several Zephyrians pulled out recording devices to capture the event for later analysis and entertainment. "Are you ready, human?" Sergeant Gex asked, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ground. Jake looked up at his massive opponent thoughtfully. "As ready as I can be, I suppose. Should I know any particular rules for this fight?" Vextar found this question hilarious. "Rules? This is combat, not a sporting event. The only rule is survival. Fight however you wish. Use whatever techniques your training provided. Sergeant Gex will do the same." "Understood," Jake replied simply. The general raised his hand for silence, enjoying the dramatic moment. Around the circle, Zephyrian soldiers leaned forward in anticipation. Even the other prisoners watched intently, though their expressions were difficult to read. "Let me make a prediction," Vextar announced loudly. "This demonstration will last less than 30 seconds. The human will attempt some primitive fighting technique learned from his basic training. Sergeant Gex will counter effortlessly and end the fight with minimal effort. We will then have concrete proof of human weakness to share with our forces throughout this sector." Jake used the time during this speech to take several deep breaths and rotate his shoulders once more. His movements were economical and purposeful, but nothing about them suggested any special skill or training. "Any final words, human?" the general asked with mock solemnity. Jake considered this question seriously for several seconds. "Just this, sir. You might want to have your medical team standing by. Someone's probably going to need attention after this fight." The suggestion that a Zephyrian warrior might require medical assistance after fighting a single human was so absurd that several soldiers actually doubled over with laughter. Even Commander Kresh smiled at the obvious joke. "Your sense of humor is admirable," Vextar said, wiping tears from his eyes. "Very well then. Let us see what the mighty human warrior can accomplish against a real opponent." He dropped his raised hand sharply. "Begin." Sergeant Gex immediately lunged forward with surprising speed for such a large creature. His massive claws swept toward Jake's chest in a move designed to end the fight immediately. It was a technique that had worked flawlessly against dozens of previous opponents. Jake stepped backward, barely avoiding the deadly claws. His movement looked clumsy and desperate, exactly what everyone expected from an inexperienced human soldier facing a superior opponent. The watching Zephyrians began counting down from 30, eager to see if their general's prediction would prove accurate. This was going to be over very quickly indeed. Jake stumbled backward as Sergeant Gex's claws whistled through the air, where his chest had been a split second before. The human's movements looked panicked and uncontrolled as he barely managed to avoid the deadly strike. Several Zephyrian soldiers cheered at what appeared to be the beginning of a very short fight. 28, 27, 26. The watching troops counted down loudly, enjoying their general's prediction game. Gex pressed his attack immediately, not wanting to give his weak opponent time to recover. The massive warrior's second strike was a backhanded swipe aimed at Jake's head, delivered with enough force to crush a human skull like an eggshell. Again, Jake managed to duck just in time, but his dodge looked desperate and lucky rather than skillful. General Vextar nodded, with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding exactly as he had expected. The human was clearly out of his depth, relying on pure survival instinct rather than any actual combat training. It would be over within seconds. 22, 21, 20. The countdown continued. Jake continued to retreat around the circle, always staying just out of reach of Gex's powerful attacks. His breathing appeared labored, and sweat ran down his face despite the cool air. Each dodge looked more difficult than the last, as if his strength was rapidly fading under the pressure. Gex began to vary his attacks, mixing high and low strikes to confuse his opponent. His claws came dangerously close to connecting several times, and Jake's escapes became increasingly narrow. The human's left side, where his injury was located, seemed to be slowing him down significantly. 15, 14, 13, the Zephyrians called out with growing excitement. But then something strange happened. As Gex launched what should have been a finishing blow, Jake's stumbling retreat suddenly became something else entirely. Instead of trying to escape the attack, he moved toward it, slipping inside the arc of the massive claws with fluid precision. The change was so sudden and unexpected that the countdown faltered. Several soldiers stopped chanting numbers and started paying closer attention to what was actually happening in the circle. Jake's shoulder drove into Gex's midsection with surprising force. The impact wasn't enough to seriously hurt the larger warrior, but it was enough to disrupt his balance and momentum. More importantly, it put Jake in a position where Gex's size and reach became disadvantages rather than assets. What? General. Vextar leaned forward, his confident smile fading slightly. For the first time since the fight began, Jake went on the offensive. His movements were no longer clumsy or desperate. Instead, they showed the kind of precision and control that came from serious training and real experience. His strikes targeted specific points on Gex's body with surgical accuracy. A quick jab to the warrior's elbow joint caused Gex's right arm to go partially numb. A knee to the side of his leg made him stagger. An elbow to his ribs produced a sharp crack that echoed across the silent circle. The watching Zephyrians had stopped counting entirely. They stared in growing confusion as their champion began to struggle against an opponent they had dismissed as harmless. "How is he doing that?" Commander Kresh asked quietly. Jake continued his assault with methodical efficiency. Every movement served a purpose. Every strike was calculated to achieve maximum effect with minimum effort. He stayed close to Gex's body, where the larger warrior's size worked against him and his claws couldn't be used effectively. Gex tried to grab his smaller opponent with both hands, hoping to use his superior strength to end the fight quickly. But Jake seemed to anticipate the move, ducking under the grasping arms and delivering a sharp blow to the back of Gex's knee that sent him stumbling forward. "This is impossible," Vextar muttered, his yellow eyes wide with disbelief. The human's apparent exhaustion had disappeared completely. His breathing was steady and controlled, his movements crisp and purposeful. Most disturbing of all, he seemed to be studying Gex even as he fought him, learning and adapting with each exchange. Gex roared in frustration and swung wildly with both arms, hoping to catch Jake with a lucky hit. The strategy might have worked against most opponents, but Jake simply wasn't there when the massive claws arrived. He had moved to a new position, one that allowed him to strike at another vulnerable spot on the warrior's body. A precise blow to the side of Gex's neck made him gasp and stumble. Another strike to his solar plexus doubled him over, leaving him struggling to breathe. Jake's attacks were not random or desperate. They followed a clear pattern, systematically breaking down his opponent's defenses and mobility. "Stop this," Vextar ordered, but his voice lacked its usual authority. He was too shocked by what he was witnessing to think clearly. Jake seemed to hear the command, but he didn't stop fighting. Instead, he looked directly at the general while continuing to dodge and counter Gex's increasingly desperate attacks. "Thought you wanted a demonstration, sir," Jake called out calmly. "This is what human combat training looks like." The casual tone of his voice was perhaps the most unsettling thing of all. Jake wasn't breathing hard or showing signs of fatigue. He was conducting a conversation while systematically dismantling a warrior who had killed hundreds of enemies in personal combat. Gex attempted one final, desperate charge, putting all his remaining strength into a massive overhead strike that would have pulverized any normal opponent. Jake waited until the last possible second, then stepped aside with minimal effort. Gex's claws struck the hard ground with tremendous force, sending up a spray of dirt and rock fragments. Before the massive warrior could recover his balance, Jake moved behind him and applied what looked like a simple wrestling hold. But there was nothing simple about the technique he used. His arms locked around Gex's neck in a way that immediately cut off blood flow to the brain without blocking the airway. Gex struggled frantically, his massive strength useless against the precisely applied pressure. Within seconds, his movements became sluggish and uncoordinated. A few seconds after that, he collapsed unconscious to the ground. Jake released the hold immediately and stepped back, breathing easily. He looked around the circle of stunned Zephyrian faces, with the same mild curiosity he had shown earlier. Dirk's silence stretched on for nearly a minute. No one seemed to know what to say or do. Their champion lay motionless in the dirt, while the creature they had mocked stood calmly over him. Finally, General Vextar found his voice. "What are you?" "He," demanded. Jake considered the question seriously. "I told you before, sir. Private Jake Collins, Ohio National Guard, same as I was 5 minutes ago." "That's impossible," Vextar snarled. "No ordinary soldier could do what you just did. You must be some kind of special forces operative, an elite warrior disguised as a common trooper." Jake shook his head slowly. "No, sir. I'm exactly what I said I was. I work part-time for the National Guard back home. During the week, I'm a high school history teacher in a small town called Millfield. This is my first deployment off Earth." The implications of this statement hit the Zephyrian general like a physical blow. If this was what an ordinary human could do, what were their actual military specialists capable of? "Your intelligence about humans seems to have some gaps in it," Jake observed mildly. "You might want to look into that." Around the circle, Zephyrian soldiers began to mutter nervously among themselves. Everything they thought they knew about human capabilities had just been proven wrong in the most dramatic way possible. Sergeant Gex stirred slightly and began to regain consciousness, but he made no attempt to continue fighting. He looked up at Jake with something that might have been respect or possibly fear. General Vextar stared at the human with growing dread, finally beginning to understand that he had made a terrible mistake. General Vextar stepped into the combat circle, his claws extended and his yellow eyes blazing with anger and confusion. The impossible had just happened before his eyes, and he needed answers immediately. Behind him, his officers whispered nervously among themselves while the regular soldiers maintained their positions but looked uncertain. "I want the truth," Vextar growled, stopping just outside Jake's reach. "No more games, no more lies. What are you really?" Jake remained calm, his hands relaxed at his sides. Sergeant Gex had managed to sit up but made no move to rejoin the fight. The massive warrior watched the exchange with careful attention, as if he too wanted to understand what had just happened to him. "I've told you the truth from the beginning, General," Jake replied in the same steady voice he had used throughout the encounter. "My name is Jake Collins. I'm 28 years old. I teach American history to 10th graders at Millfield High School in Ohio. I joined the National Guard 6 years ago, mostly for the college benefits and because my grandfather served in World War II. "Impossible," Vextar snarled. "No weekend warrior could defeat Sergeant Gex in single combat. He has 47 years of military experience. He has killed enemies from 17 different species. You must be lying about your identity." Jake shrugged slightly. "I understand why you'd think that, sir. But I really am just a guardsman on my first off-world deployment. This is actually the first time I've ever been in real combat." The words hit General Vextar like ice water. First time in combat? That meant everything Jake had just demonstrated was based purely on training, not battlefield experience. The implications were staggering. "What kind of training does your National Guard provide?" Commander Kresh asked, stepping forward with his data tablet ready to record the answer. "Standard military preparation," Jake answered. "Basic combat skills, weapons training, physical fitness, first aid, survival techniques. Nothing unusual by human standards." "By human standards," Vextar repeated slowly. "Explain what that means." Jake looked around at the circle of watching faces before answering. "Well, all human children learn some form of combat training in school. Usually it's called physical education or sports, but the principles are the same. Competition, strategy, physical conditioning, working under pressure." The Zephyrian general's confusion deepened. "You teach combat to children?" "Not exactly combat," Jake clarified, "but we teach them how to compete, how to handle physical confrontation, how to push through pain and exhaustion to achieve goals. Most humans participate in some form of competitive activity during their youth. Football, wrestling, martial arts, boxing. It's considered normal childhood development." Commander Kresh looked up from his tablet with alarm. "General, if their children receive combat preparation as part of standard education, Then every adult human has basic warrior training. The realization sent a chill through the assembled Zephyrian forces. They had assumed humans were a peaceful species with no military tradition. The idea that their entire population received combat conditioning from childhood changed everything. "Tell me about your world," Vextar demanded. "What kind of planet produces warriors like you?" Jake considered the question carefully. "Earth is what you might call a competitive environment, sir. For most of our history, humans lived in small groups that had to fight for resources: food, water, territory, mates. The weak didn't survive long enough to reproduce, so evolution favored traits like aggression, endurance, and tactical thinking. Most species achieve peace through technology or social evolution," Commander Kresh observed. "They overcome their violent past through advancement." "Humans did achieve peace," Jake agreed. "But we did it through victory, not avoidance. We fought wars for thousands of years until we got so good at killing each other that we finally decided to stop. The traits that made us successful warriors didn't disappear. They just got redirected into other activities." General Vextar felt a growing sense of dread as he began to understand the true nature of humanity. "Your entire species consists of evolved warriors?" "In a sense, yes, sir. Every human alive today is descended from ancestors who survived countless wars, famines, plagues, and natural disasters. The genetic traits that allowed them to survive got passed down to us. We might live in peaceful times now, but we still carry the instincts and capabilities of our warrior ancestors." The general's tactical mind began processing this information and reaching terrifying conclusions. "If every human has basic combat potential, how many of you are there?" "About 12 billion on Earth," Jake replied casually, "plus maybe another billion scattered across our colony worlds." 12 billion potential warriors. The number was staggering. Even if only a small percentage had military training, that would still represent the largest army in galactic history. "But your colonies fell easily to our forces," Vextar protested, grasping for some reassurance. "We conquered 3 human settlements with minimal resistance." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "Those were civilian colonies, sir. Farmers, miners, scientists, families. They weren't military installations. Most of the people living there had never seen combat and weren't equipped for war. Then why didn't they fight back? Why did they surrender so quickly?" "Because they were smart enough to know when they were outgunned," Jake explained. "Civilians don't throw their lives away in hopeless battles. They surrender when they have to and wait for rescue. That's actually good tactical thinking." The distinction between civilian and military populations was something Vextar had never considered. Most alien species didn't maintain that separation. Their warriors were a specialized class, easily identified and counted. But if humans trained their entire population for potential combat while maintaining separate military forces— "How large is your actual military?" the general asked quietly. "That's classified information, sir. But I can tell you that Earth takes defense very seriously. We learned a long time ago that peace is only possible when you're strong enough to enforce it." Commander Kresh was frantically taking notes on his tablet. "General, our intelligence estimates of human military strength may be completely inaccurate. If we've only encountered civilian populations—" "I know," Vextar said grimly. He was beginning to realize the magnitude of his error. Everything he thought he knew about humanity was wrong. Instead of discovering a weak species ripe for conquest, he had stumbled upon a sleeping military giant. "There's something else you should understand," Jake continued. "Humans don't just fight as individuals. We're pack hunters by nature. We specialize in group tactics, coordinated strategies, and combined arms warfare. What you saw here was just one person using basic techniques. Real human military operations involve thousands of soldiers working together with sophisticated equipment and detailed planning." The description sent another wave of fear through the Zephyrian ranks. Their own military relied heavily on individual prowess and simple tactics. The idea of facing an enemy that specialized in complex coordination was deeply disturbing. "Why are you telling us this?" Vexitar demanded. "Why reveal your species' capabilities?" Jake's expression grew serious for the first time since the conversation began. "Because you need to understand what you're really dealing with, General. Your intelligence about humans is dangerously incomplete. You've been making decisions based on false information, and that's going to get a lot of people killed. Are you threatening me? No, sir, I'm trying to warn you. There's a difference between civilian colonies and military targets. If you keep attacking human settlements, eventually you're going to hit something that can fight back. And when that happens, you're going to discover that humans take protection of their people very seriously. General Vextar stared at the small figure before him, finally beginning to grasp the terrible truth. He hadn't captured a weak enemy soldier. He had stumbled upon a representative of the galaxy's most dangerous warrior species, and he had done it by attacking their civilians. The general's worst fears were about to be confirmed in the most dramatic way possible. General Vextar felt the weight of impending doom settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. Everything Jake had told him painted a picture of humanity that was completely different from his intelligence reports. But there was something in the human's calm demeanor that suggested even more revelations were coming. There's something else you need to know, Jake said quietly, glancing up at the alien sky where the twin suns were beginning to set. Something that's going to change your situation here very dramatically. The general's yellow eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Jake checked what appeared to be a simple wrist device, though Vexitar now realized it might be more sophisticated than it looked. My capture wasn't an accident, General. I volunteered for this mission specifically because I wanted to be taken prisoner. What? Commander Kresh stepped forward, his data tablet forgotten. That makes no sense. Why would anyone volunteer to be captured? Intelligence gathering, Jake replied simply. The Coalition needed detailed information about Zephyrian military, capabilities, command structures, and defensive positions. The best way to get that information was to have someone observe your operations from the inside. Vextar felt his stomach drop. You're a spy. Not exactly, I really am just a National Guard soldier. But I volunteered for this assignment because my civilian job gave me useful skills. History teachers are good at observing details, remembering information, and understanding how organizations work. Plus, my apparent weakness made me the perfect candidate to be underestimated. The implications hit the general like a physical blow. Everything that had happened from Jake's capture to this very conversation had been planned. The human had been studying them the entire time, gathering intelligence while pretending to be a helpless prisoner. What have you learned? Vextar demanded. Jake's expression grew thoughtful. Quite a lot, actually. Your tactical doctrine relies heavily on intimidation and superior firepower. Your soldiers are individually strong but not well coordinated. Your equipment is impressive but designed for fighting other alien species, not humans. Most importantly, your command structure is rigid and doesn't adapt well to unexpected situations. Each observation was delivered in the same calm, analytical tone that Jake might use when discussing historical battles with his students. But every word cut into Vextar's confidence like a blade. You've also made some strategic errors, Jake continued. Attacking civilian colonies was probably intended to demoralize the Coalition and demonstrate Zephyrian strength. But from a human perspective, targeting non-combatants is the kind of behavior that demands a military response. We conquered those settlements easily, Vextar protested, though his voice lacked conviction. Because they were full of families, not soldiers, Jake pointed out. Farmers don't carry military-grade weapons, scientists don't have combat training, children can't fight back against armored warriors. Conquering civilians doesn't prove military superiority. It just proves you're willing to attack the defenseless. The words stung because they contained an uncomfortable truth. Vextar had been proud of those easy victories, but now they seemed less impressive and more shameful. Commander Kresh was frantically working with his tablet. General, if the human has been gathering intelligence, we need to assume that everything he's observed will be transmitted to Coalition forces. Already done, Jake said helpfully. The device on my wrist has been recording and transmitting data since I was captured. Everything that's happened here, including this conversation, has been sent to my commanders in real time. The casual revelation sent a wave of panic through the Zephyrian ranks. Their positions, their numbers, their capabilities. Even their tactical discussions had all been monitored and recorded by enemy intelligence. That's impossible, Vextar snarled. We scanned you for transmitters. We found nothing. Human technology isn't as primitive as your report suggested, Jake replied. We've gotten very good at making things that don't look dangerous. It's a survival trait we developed over thousands of years of warfare. The general's claws extended involuntarily as anger and fear warred within him. Even if you've gathered intelligence, it won't matter. Your coalition forces are scattered across multiple systems. It would take weeks for them to organize a response to our presence here. Jake checked his wrist device again and smiled slightly. Actually, sir, I think you should look at your long-range sensors. Commander Kresh immediately activated his communications equipment, connecting to the sensor operators aboard their command ship. The conversation was brief but intense, conducted in rapid Zephyrian that grew increasingly agitated. General, Kresh said when he finished the call, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. Long-range sensors are detecting massive hyperspace signatures at the edge of the system. Multiple contacts, very large, moving toward our position at high speed. Vextar felt the blood drain from his face. How many ships? At least 30 capital vessels, sir. Possibly more. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. Jake nodded as if this news was exactly what he had expected. That would be the Earth Defense Fleet 3rd Expeditionary Group. Admiral Kate Murphy commanding from the battleship UES Defiance. They've been waiting in hyperspace just outside your sensor range for the past 6 hours. The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. The humans hadn't just known about the Zephyrian presence on this world. They had planned an entire military operation around it, using Jake's intelligence mission as the trigger for a massive fleet action. 6 hours? Vextar repeated numbly. They've been there for 6 hours? Ever since I transmitted the location of your fleet and confirmed your defensive positions, Jake explained. Admiral Murphy wanted to make sure she had complete tactical information before beginning the attack. Human military doctrine emphasizes thorough preparation and overwhelming force. Commander Kresh was receiving another urgent transmission. His expression grew more horrified with each passing second. General, the human ships are enormous. Our largest dreadnought would be considered a light cruiser compared to their smallest vessel, and there are dozens of them. Earth takes the protection of its people very seriously, Jake said quietly. When you attacked those civilian colonies, you weren't just conquering territory. You were declaring war on 12 billion humans and proving that Zephyrian forces represent a threat to innocent families. The scope of Vextar's miscalculation was becoming clear. He had thought he was conducting routine military operations against a weak enemy. Instead, he had provoked a massive military response from a species of warriors whose capabilities he had completely misunderstood. What do they want? The general asked desperately. Justice, Jake replied simply. You attacked civilians who couldn't defend themselves. Now you get to face soldiers who can. The communications equipment crackled to life with an incoming transmission on standard coalition frequencies. The voice that emerged was crisp, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its calm certainty. Zephyrian forces, this is Admiral Kate Murphy of the Earth Defense Fleet. You are ordered to surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force. You have 5 minutes to comply. General Vextar looked around at his frightened officers and confused soldiers. Everything he had believed about human weakness and Zephyrian superiority had been proven catastrophically wrong. His enemy had outmaneuvered him strategically, outfought him tactically, and was now prepared to destroy his entire fleet. Jake Collins, the weak human soldier he had mocked and underestimated, stood calmly in the center of the combat circle while the Zephyrian Empire's carefully planned conquest crumbled around them. I tried to warn you, General, Jake said with something that might have been sympathy. You could have learned something important about humans. Unfortunately, you're about to get a much more comprehensive education than either of us wanted. As the massive human warships moved into attack position, General Vextar finally understood the terrible price of underestimating humanity.